What if the reason you feel stuck isn't because you're not good enough, but because you're too afraid to begin again? This is my real story of leaving everything behind for love, moving to the United States, struggling with English, culture, and doubt, and slowly rebuilding a new life from zero. Through simple, slow English storytelling, you'll follow my journey of fear, growth, marriage, family, and hope, and maybe discover the courage to restart your own life. Leaving everything behind. What if the life you're holding on to right now is the very thing quietly stopping you from becoming who you're meant to be? I didn't believe that at first. I thought stability was safety. I thought comfort was success. But sometimes, the place you feel okay is actually where your dreams slowly fall asleep. I remember the exact night I made the decision. It was not dramatic. No music, no movie moment. Just me, sitting in a small room, staring at my phone, reading one simple message. Do you really want to try this life with me in America? That question felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. At that time, my English was, let's say, very basic. I could understand simple sentences, but when people spoke fast, my brain felt like it was buffering. You know that feeling when someone talks and you just smile and nod, hoping they won't ask you anything? Yes, that was me. Every day. And yet, somehow, I said yes. Not because I was brave. Honestly, I was terrified. But there was something stronger than fear. It was curiosity. A quiet voice in my head kept asking, what if this works? What if your life changes completely? That question stayed with me longer than my fear. So I packed my life into one suitcase. One suitcase. Imagine that. Years of memories, habits, routines, reduced to clothes, documents, and a few emotional items I couldn't leave behind. The rest? I had to let go. Letting go sounds poetic, but in reality, it feels like losing control. Your brain doesn't like that. There's actually a psychological reason for this. Your mind is designed to protect you, not to make you happy. It prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar possibility. Scientists call this the comfort zone bias. Basically, your brain would rather keep you safe in a life you don't fully love than risk everything for something uncertain. So when I chose to leave, my brain went into full panic mode. What if you fail? What if the relationship doesn't work? What if you can't speak English well enough? What if you feel alone? And here's the interesting part. None of those questions had answers. But they felt real. Very real. On the flight to the United States, I wasn't excited like in movies. I was quiet, observing, thinking, overthinking. Every announcement in English felt like a test I didn't study for. I tried to listen carefully, catching familiar words like boarding, arrival, thank you. But most of it just flew over my head like background noise. That's when I realized something important. Understanding a language in a classroom is very different from living inside it. When you learn English from books, everything is slow, clear, controlled. But real life? People speak fast, they use slang, they don't repeat themselves, and they expect you to keep up. It's like learning how to swim in a small pool and suddenly being thrown into the ocean. But here's the twist no one tells you. That uncomfortable feeling? That confusion? That I don't understand anything moment? That's not failure. That's the beginning of real learning. There's a concept in neuroscience called desirable difficulty. It means your brain actually learns better when things feel slightly hard. When you struggle just a little, your brain pays more attention. It starts building stronger connections. In simple terms, confusion is not your enemy. It's your training partner. Still, knowing that didn't make it easier emotionally. When I landed, everything felt different. The air, the space, the sounds. Even silence felt different. I remember looking around and thinking, okay, this is real now. There's no going back. And then I saw the person I moved for. That moment? It was both comforting and overwhelming. Love was there, yes. But so was reality. Love doesn't magically solve language barriers. It doesn't automatically teach you how to adapt to a new culture. It doesn't explain jokes you don't understand or help you order food when you're nervous. But it gives you a reason to try. And sometimes a reason is all you need to take the next step. The first conversation I had after arriving was simple. Very simple. How are you? I'm good, and you? I'm good. That was it. But inside, it felt like I just ran a marathon. Because every word required effort. Every sentence needed courage. And every moment reminded me that I was starting from zero again. Now, let me tell you something you might not expect. Starting from zero is not as bad as it sounds. In fact, it's powerful. When you start from zero, you're free from expectations. No one expects you to be perfect. No one expects you to know everything. You're allowed to make mistakes. And mistakes are where the real story begins. Looking back, that decision to leave everything behind was not just about love. It was about identity. About asking myself a question most people avoid. Who am I when everything familiar is gone? And maybe you're asking yourself something similar right now. Maybe you're tired of trying to learn English and feeling stuck. Maybe you've thought about quitting more times than you want to admit. Maybe you've told yourself, this is too hard, or I'm not good at languages. But here's what I learned on that journey, sitting on a plane, holding on to uncertainty like it was the only thing I had left. You don't need to be ready to start. You just need to be willing. Because readiness is a myth. No one feels 100% ready to change their life. They just move forward and figure it out along the way. So I moved. Not because I was confident, not because I was fluent, but because I chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, my life could become something more. And that maybe was enough to change everything. First days in America. Have you ever walked into a place where everything looks normal but nothing feels familiar? That was my first morning in America. The sun looked the same. The sky was still blue. People were just people. But inside my head, everything felt louder, faster, and strangely distant. Jet lag hit me like a quiet storm. I woke up at 3 a.m., wide awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why my body refused to follow the clock. But it wasn't just time that felt off. My thoughts were racing in 2 languages, and neither of them felt complete. I tried to think in English, but my brain kept translating everything like a slow, tired machine. I need water. Okay, water. Where is water? Kitchen, how to ask. Simple things suddenly became complicated puzzles. That's when you realize something no textbook prepares you for. Language is not just about words. It's about speed, confidence, and survival. In real life, you don't have time to translate every sentence. People speak, expect a response, and move on. If you hesitate, the moment disappears. And in those first days, I hesitated a lot. The first time I went to a grocery store, I felt like I had entered a maze. Everything was bigger than I expected. The aisles were long, the choices endless, and the labels confusing. I stood there holding a carton, reading it again and again, trying to understand if it was milk, cream, or something completely different. A man walked by and said something like, "You finding everything okay?" I froze. My brain heard the words, but it didn't process them fast enough. By the time I understood, he had already moved on. And I just stood there, holding my confusion like it was part of the shopping list. Moments like that happen more often than you think. And each time, your confidence drops just a little. There's actually a psychological reason for this feeling. When you're in a new environment, your brain goes into high alert mode. It's scanning everything, sounds, faces, words, behaviors, trying to understand what's safe and what's not. This uses a lot of mental energy. That's why you feel tired even when you haven't done much. It's not laziness. It's cognitive overload. In simple terms, your brain is working overtime just to help you exist in a new place. And when you add a new language on top of that, it's like running a marathon while solving math problems in your head. But here's where things get interesting. Even in the middle of confusion, your brain is learning. Every sound you hear, every sentence you don't fully understand, every awkward interaction, it's all building a new system inside your mind. Slowly, quietly, without asking for permission. The problem is you don't feel that progress immediately. You only feel the struggle. I remember sitting at the dinner table one evening. Everyone was talking, laughing, sharing stories. The conversation moved quickly, full of jokes and expressions I had never heard before. I caught maybe 30% of it, and I smiled. Not because I understood everything, but because I didn't want to feel left out. But inside, there was a small voice asking, will I ever be part of this? Or will I always be the person who just listens and smiles? That question stayed with me longer than any conversation. And then came the weather. No one really talks about how weather can affect your emotions when you move to a new country. Back home, I was used to a certain rhythm, the heat, the humidity, the familiar feeling of the air. But here, everything was different. The cold felt sharper. The wind felt stronger. Even the silence felt heavier. It's strange, but when your environment changes, your identity feels a little unstable. You don't just miss people. You miss how you used to feel. And in those moments, doubt becomes louder. What did I do? Why did I come here? Was this a mistake? These thoughts don't arrive dramatically. They show up quietly, in between moments. When you're alone. When you don't understand a conversation. When you realize you can't express your thoughts the way you want. But here's something most people don't realize. That feeling of discomfort? It's a sign of transformation. There's a concept called identity shift. It happens when you're placed in a completely new environment. Your old habits don't fully work anymore, and your new habits haven't formed yet. You're in between versions of yourself. It's uncomfortable, confusing, sometimes even painful, but it's also where growth begins. So instead of running away from that feeling, I started observing it. I noticed the small things. The way people greeted each other. The way they ordered coffee. The way they used simple phrases like, how's it going? Or take care. At first, these were just sounds. Then slowly, they became patterns. And patterns are easier to learn than random information. So I started doing something very simple. I listened. Not perfectly. Not actively all the time, but consistently. While watching TV, I paid attention to tone. While walking outside, I listened to conversations. While sitting in silence, I replayed sentences in my head. I'm good. Sounds good. Let's do it. Short phrases. Simple structure. Real language. This is something many English learners overlook. You don't need complex vocabulary to start speaking. You need familiar patterns. Repetition, rhythm, and that's exactly what real life gives you. Not perfect grammar, not textbook sentences, but usable English. Still, progress didn't feel fast. There were days I felt confident, and then suddenly, one small interaction would make me feel like I knew nothing again. It's like climbing a mountain where the path sometimes goes down before going up again. Frustrating? Yes. Normal? Completely. Because learning a language is not a straight line. It's messy, emotional, unpredictable. But every time I wanted to give up, I reminded myself of one thing. I didn't come here to stay comfortable. I came here to change. And change is never easy at the beginning. So I kept going. Even when my sentences were broken. Even when my pronunciation wasn't perfect. Even when I felt like an outsider. Because deep down, I knew something was happening. Something slow. Something quiet. But something real. I wasn't just learning English. I was rebuilding myself. And the truth is, those first days in America weren't about success or failure. They were about survival, adaptation, and the courage to stay, even when everything inside you whispers, go back. But I didn't go back. I stayed. And that decision? It changed everything that came next. Love felt easy. English was hard. Isn't it strange how love can feel so simple, while everything around it feels impossibly hard? You can understand a person's smile without translation. You can feel warmth in a hug without grammar. But the moment you try to explain your thoughts in a new language, everything suddenly becomes complicated. That was my reality. Love brought me to the United States, but English was the test I didn't know I signed up for. At home, things were easy. We had our own rhythm. Simple conversations. Short sentences. A mix of English and gestures. Sometimes we didn't even need words. A look, a laugh, a quiet moment, that was enough. But outside, that was a completely different world. The first time we went out to eat together, I remember staring at the menu like it was a puzzle designed to defeat me. So many words. So many options. My eyes moved across the page, but my brain was slow to catch up. "What would you like?" the server asked. A simple question. Very common. Very normal. But in that moment, it felt like a spotlight was on me. My heart started beating faster. My brain searched for words. I knew what I wanted, but saying it felt like trying to unlock a door with the wrong key. I want this one, I said, pointing at the menu. The server smiled. Great choice. That was it. No problem.
No judgment.
But inside, I felt like I had just completed a difficult exam. This is something many English learners experience, but rarely talk about. It's not just about knowing vocabulary. It's about performance under pressure. When someone is waiting for your answer, your brain doesn't always cooperate. It freezes. It hesitates. It doubts. There's actually a scientific explanation for this. It's called the affective filter. When you feel nervous, anxious, or afraid of making mistakes, your brain creates a kind of emotional barrier. Even if you know the words, they get stuck behind that barrier. So it's not that you don't know English. It's that your emotions are blocking access to what you already know. And in those early days, my affective filter was very high. Every conversation felt like a test. Every mistake felt bigger than it really was. Every silence felt like failure. But here's where love quietly did something powerful. It gave me a safe space to fail. At home, I could try. I could make mistakes. I could say the wrong word and laugh about it. There was no pressure to be perfect. And that changed everything. Because confidence doesn't grow in perfect situations. It grows in safe ones. I remember one evening, we were sitting together, and I tried to tell a story. A simple story about my day. But halfway through, I got stuck. I couldn't find the right word. My sentence broke in the middle. So I stopped. "I can't say it," I said, frustrated. But instead of correcting me or finishing the sentence, I heard something unexpected. "Take your time. You can do it." That moment stayed with me because it shifted something inside my mind. Instead of thinking, "I'm bad at English," I started thinking, "I'm learning English." Small difference. Big impact. This is what psychologists call a growth mindset. When you believe your abilities can improve with effort, your brain becomes more open to learning. You stop seeing mistakes as proof of failure and start seeing them as part of the process. And trust me, I made a lot of mistakes. Sometimes funny ones. Sometimes confusing ones. Sometimes slightly embarrassing ones. Like the time I wanted to say, "I'm full after eating," but accidentally said something completely different. The reaction I got? Let's just say it was memorable. But here's the thing. Mistakes didn't destroy my progress. Avoiding mistakes would have. Because every time I tried, even imperfectly, my brain was building new connections, new patterns, new confidence. And slowly, something interesting started to happen. I began to recognize phrases. Not just individual words, but chunks of language. "I'm gonna." "I don't know if." It kind of feels like these phrases became my tools. Instead of building sentences word by word, I started using ready-made patterns. And that made speaking faster, smoother, more natural. This is actually how native speakers communicate. They don't think about grammar rules when they talk. They use patterns they've heard thousands of times. So I did the same. I listened. I repeated. I used. Over and over again. And even though my English wasn't perfect, it started to feel alive. Meanwhile, love continued to grow. But not in a perfect, movie-like way. Real love includes misunderstandings, especially when language is limited. There were moments when I couldn't fully express my feelings. Moments when I wanted to say something deep, but only had simple words. And that can be frustrating, because emotions are complex. But language takes time. So we learn something important. Communication is not just about vocabulary. It's about intention,
tone,
patience. Sometimes a simple sentence like, I feel sad today, can carry more meaning than a long, perfect explanation. And sometimes silence says more than words ever could. Through those moments, I realized something I didn't expect. English was not just a subject to study. It was a bridge between two people, two cultures, two ways of thinking. And building that bridge took time. But every small conversation added a piece. Every mistake fixed a crack. Every laugh made it stronger. Still, there were days I felt behind. Days I compared myself to others. Days I thought, why is this so easy for them and so hard for me? If you've ever felt that, let me tell you something honestly. You're not slow. You're not incapable. You're just in the middle of your process. And the middle? It's always messy. But it's also where the real transformation happens. Because learning English is not just about speaking correctly. It's about becoming someone who is not afraid to speak at all. And that version of you? It doesn't appear overnight. It grows one imperfect sentence at a time. Looking back, love may have been the reason I moved. But struggle was the reason I grew. And English? English became the tool that shaped a new version of me. A version that was still learning, still improving, but no longer afraid to try. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of real change. Small words, big confidence. What if the reason you still feel bad at English isn't because you lack talent, but because you've been trying to learn too much at once? Sounds unfair, right? Like you've been working hard, memorizing vocabulary, studying grammar, and still feeling stuck. I've been there. And the truth is, the problem wasn't effort. It was direction. In my early days in the United States, I thought improvement meant learning more words, more vocabulary, bigger sentences, more complicated grammar. So I pushed myself to study like that. Long lists, new phrases, advanced expressions I barely understood. And guess what happened? I forgot most of it. Not because I wasn't trying hard enough. It prioritizes what feels relevant, repeatable, and emotionally connected. That's why you can remember a song after hearing it a few times, but forget a vocabulary list after hours of study. So, I changed my approach. Not in a dramatic way, just smaller. Instead of learning 20 new words a day, I focused on 5. But not just any 5 words. Words I could actually use. Simple ones. Daily ones. Real ones. I think. I feel. I need. I want. Maybe. At first, it felt too basic. Almost childish. Like I was going backward instead of forward. But here's the twist. Those small words became powerful. Because I used them every day. I started building sentences like, I think this is good. I feel tired today. I need some help. I want to try. Not perfect sentences. Not impressive sentences. But real sentences. And every time I used them, my brain said, okay, this matters. Let's keep this. That's how confidence begins. Not from complexity, but from repetition. There's a concept in language learning called high-frequency language. These are the words and phrases used most often in daily conversations. And interestingly, a small number of words can cover a large percentage of real communication. In simple terms, you don't need thousands of words to start speaking. You need the right ones. And more importantly, you need to use them. So I started doing something different. I turned my life into a small English story. Every day. Simple. Slow. Honest. In the morning, I would say, today I wake up early. I feel a little tired, but I want to try. In the afternoon, I go outside. The weather is cold. I don't like it, but it's okay. At night, I feel better today. I speak a little more. Not perfect, but I try. These were not impressive sentences, but they were mine. And that made a difference. Because when you speak about your own life, your brain connects language with emotion. And emotional learning is stronger, deeper, and more memorable. This is something backed by neuroscience. When information is tied to personal experience, your brain activates more areas, making it easier to remember and use. So instead of learning random sentences, I learned my own story. And slowly something changed. I stopped being afraid of speaking. Not because I became fluent overnight, but because I became familiar with my own voice in English. That's a powerful shift. Many learners are not afraid of English itself. They're afraid of hearing themselves speak it. It sounds different. It feels strange. It's not the voice they're used to. But the more you use it, the more it becomes you. I remember one small moment that felt bigger than it should have. I was at a coffee shop. A simple place. Nothing special. The barista asked, "What can I get for you?" And this time, I didn't panic. I didn't freeze. I said, "Hi, I'd like a small coffee, please." Simple. Clear. Calm. And then something unexpected happened. They understood me immediately.
No confusión. No repetition.
Just a normal interaction. To anyone else, this would be nothing. But to me, it felt like progress. Real progress. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like I was trying to speak English. I was just speaking. That's when I realized something important. Fluency is not about speaking fast. It's about speaking without fear. And fear disappears when things feel familiar. So I kept building familiarity. I repeated the same phrases, used the same patterns, told the same small stories, again and again. And instead of getting bored, I got better. Because repetition is not boring when it creates results. It's satisfying. Now, let me be honest with you. This method is not exciting at first. It doesn't feel like a big breakthrough. It feels slow, too simple, maybe even too easy. But that's exactly why it works. Because your brain doesn't resist it. There's no pressure.
No overwhelm.
Just small, consistent steps. And over time, those small steps create something big. Confidence. Real confidence. Not the kind that comes from knowing a lot of words, but the kind that comes from using what you know without hesitation. And here's the part most people don't expect. Once you feel confident with simple English, adding more becomes easier. Because now you have a foundation, a rhythm, a sense of control. You're not starting from zero anymore. You're building on something real. Looking back, I didn't improve because I studied harder. I improved because I simplified. I stopped chasing perfection and started practicing consistency. So, if you feel stuck right now, if you feel like your English is not improving, maybe the answer is not to do more. Maybe the answer is to do less. But do it better. Use small words. Tell small stories. Speak slowly. Repeat often. And most importantly, be patient with yourself. Because confidence doesn't arrive suddenly. It grows quietly, in small moments, in simple sentences, in everyday conversations. And one day, without realizing it, you'll say something in English, and it will feel natural, not forced, not scary, just you. And that's when you'll understand. Small words don't make you small. They make you strong. When I wanted to quit. Have you ever had a day where nothing is technically wrong, but everything feels heavy? Like your body is there, your life is moving, but your energy is gone? That was the kind of day I remember most clearly, the day I almost quit everything.
Not in a dramatic way.
No big speech. No final decision. Just a quiet thought that kept repeating in my head, maybe this isn't for me. It started small. A misunderstanding at home. Not a big argument. Just one of those moments where you try to explain something important, but the words don't come out right. You say something simple, but it sounds incomplete. The other person hears it differently. And suddenly, the feeling you wanted to express disappears somewhere between languages. I remember sitting there thinking, if I could just say this in my native language, everything would be clear. But I couldn't. And that gap, that invisible space between what you feel and what you can say, can be incredibly frustrating. Because language is not just communication. It's connection. And when that connection feels weak, even love can feel distant. Then came the outside world. That same day, I had to make a phone call. A simple one. Just to ask about something small. But if you've ever tried speaking English on the phone, you know, it's a completely different challenge. No body language.
No facial expressions.
Just sound. And sound can be unforgiving. The person on the other end spoke fast. Too fast. I caught maybe half of what they said. My brain tried to keep up, but it felt like chasing a train that was already moving. Sorry, can you repeat that? I asked. They repeated. Still too fast. Sorry, one more time? A pause. And then a slight change in tone. Not rude, but less patient. That's when something shifted inside me. Not because of them, but because of me. I started to feel small. Not physically, but mentally. Like I had suddenly become less capable than I used to be. And that feeling? It stayed with me the rest of the day. By the time evening came, I was exhausted. Not from doing too much, but from trying too hard. Trying to understand. Trying to respond. Trying to be good enough. I sat down, quiet, staring at nothing in particular, and the thought came back again. Maybe I should stop. Not just stop learning English, but stop pushing. Stop trying to adapt. Stop this whole idea of starting over. Because starting over sounds exciting in theory. In reality, it's uncomfortable, lonely, uncertain, and sometimes it feels endless. There's a concept in psychology called decision fatigue. When your brain has to make too many decisions, especially in a new environment, it becomes overwhelmed. Even simple choices feel difficult. Your mental energy drops and your motivation disappears. That's exactly what was happening. Every day, I was making hundreds of small decisions in a language I wasn't comfortable with. What to say, how to say it, when to say it, whether to speak at all. And over time, that mental effort adds up, until one day your brain just says, enough. That's the moment most people quit. Not because they're weak, but because they're tired. Deeply tired. And here's the part no one likes to admit. I didn't feel inspired that day. I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel like a main character in a motivational story. I felt like someone who made a mistake. Someone who left a comfortable life for something that now felt too hard. Too confusing. Too far away from who I used to be. And for a few hours, I believed that. I believed that maybe I wasn't meant for this kind of life. Maybe I wasn't the kind of person who could adapt so much. Maybe I had overestimated myself. But then something small happened. Not dramatic. Not life-changing. Just small. I heard a sentence. A simple sentence I had practiced before. I think I need a break. And for the first time that day, it felt clear. Not in my native language. In English. I think I need a break. That sentence did something interesting. It didn't solve my problems, but it gave me space. Because instead of saying, I quit, I said, I pause. And those two ideas are very different. Quitting is final. Pausing is temporary. And sometimes your brain doesn't need motivation. It needs permission to rest. So that night I didn't study. I didn't force myself to speak more. I didn't try to fix anything. I just allowed myself to feel tired. And that might sound simple, but it's actually powerful. Because when you stop fighting your emotions, they lose some of their intensity. The next morning, something surprising happened. I didn't feel amazing, but I didn't feel hopeless either. I felt neutral. And neutral is enough to continue. This is something many people misunderstand about motivation. You don't need to feel motivated to take action. You just need to feel slightly better than yesterday. Even 1% better is progress. So I did one small thing. I spoke one simple sentence. Then another. Nothing impressive. Nothing perfect. But enough to move forward. And that's when I realized something important. The hardest part of any journey is not the beginning. It's the middle. The part where excitement is gone, but results are not fully visible yet. The part where you question everything. The part where quitting feels reasonable. But it's also the part where most growth happens. Because if you can stay during that phase, even imperfectly, you build something stronger than skill. You build resilience. And resilience doesn't come from easy days. It comes from days when you almost gave up but didn't. Looking back, that day I wanted to quit was not a failure. It was a turning point, because it forced me to stop chasing perfection and start accepting reality. Learning English is hard. Adapting to a new culture is hard. Building a new life is hard. But hard doesn't mean impossible. It just means it takes time. So, if you're in that moment right now, that quiet moment where you're thinking, maybe I should stop. Let me tell you something honestly. You don't have to quit. You can pause. You can rest. You can feel tired. But you don't have to give up your story. Because the version of you that keeps going, even slowly, even imperfectly, is the version that eventually changes everything. And sometimes the difference between failure and success is just one decision, not to quit today. A different way to learn. What if the problem isn't your English, but the way you've been trying to learn it? I used to think improvement meant pushing harder. More grammar, more vocabulary, more pressure. But after that day when I almost quit, I realized something uncomfortable. Effort without direction just makes you tired. So I did something that felt almost wrong. I slowed down. Not just a little. A lot. Instead of chasing advanced English, I went back to something simple. Almost embarrassingly simple. Stories. Not long novels. Not complex scripts. Just short, slow, real-life stories about me. At first, it felt like going backward. But within a few days, something shifted. I started understanding more. Not because the English was easier, but because my brain finally had time to connect the dots. Here's the science behind it. Your brain processes language in chunks, not individual words. When you hear a sentence slowly, with clear structure and meaning, your brain can group those words into patterns. But when everything is fast and complex, your brain gets overwhelmed and stops processing efficiently. So instead of forcing my brain to run faster, I gave it a better path. I began recording my own voice. Yes, my own voice. That was the turning point. I would take a simple idea from my day and say it in English, slowly, clearly, like I was telling a story to a friend who needed time to understand. Today, I went outside. The weather was cold. I felt a little tired, but I still tried to speak English. Then I would listen to it. Not once. Many times. At first, it was uncomfortable. Hearing your own voice in a second language is like looking at a version of yourself you don't fully recognize. The pronunciation feels strange. The rhythm sounds off. You notice every small mistake. But here's the surprising part. That discomfort is exactly where learning happens. There's a concept called active listening. When you listen to something you created, your brain pays more attention. You're not just hearing the language, you're analyzing it, comparing it, adjusting it. You become both the speaker and the learner at the same time. And that creates a powerful feedback loop.
Speak.
Listen. Adjust.
Repeat.
No pressure.
No judgment.
Just progress. I started doing this every day. Short stories. Simple language. Real emotions. And slowly I noticed something I hadn't felt before.
Clarity.
Not perfect English, but clearer English. I understood what I was saying. I could follow my own thoughts. And most importantly, I wasn't afraid of my own voice anymore. That changed everything. Because once you stop fearing your own voice, speaking to others becomes easier. Around the same time, I added another small habit. I started watching short videos, but differently. Not like entertainment, like training. Instead of watching for fun, I watched for patterns. I picked one short clip, just one, and I listened carefully. Not to understand every word, but to catch the rhythm. How did they start sentences? What phrases did they repeat? What tone did they use? Then I paused, and I repeated, out loud, not perfectly, not fast, just honestly. I'm not sure. That makes sense. I think so. Short phrases. Real phrases. Usable phrases. This is something many learners miss. You don't need to understand everything to improve. You need to recognize what is useful and practice that. So instead of trying to learn everything, I focused on what I could actually use in daily life. And that made learning feel lighter. Not easier, but lighter. Less pressure. More flow. And here's where it gets interesting. The more I used this method, the more I started to notice patterns in real conversations. Someone would say something, and my brain would think, I've heard this before. Even if I didn't fully understand, it felt familiar. And familiarity creates confidence. Confidence creates action. And action creates improvement. That's the cycle. But it starts with something simple. Reducing overwhelm. There's a psychological principle called cognitive load. It refers to how much information your brain can handle at one time. When the load is too high, your brain shuts down or avoids the task. That's why many people feel stuck learning English. Not because they're incapable, but because they're overloaded. Too many words. Too many rules. Too many expectations. So I removed the excess. I simplified everything. Short stories.
Slow speech.
Repeatable phrases. Daily practice. And suddenly learning felt possible again. Not exciting every day. Not easy every moment. But possible. And that's all I needed. I remember one afternoon, I was walking outside, repeating a sentence quietly to myself. I think I understand more now. And for the first time it felt true. Not because I reached a high level, but because I could see progress. Real, visible progress. That's something motivation alone can't give you. You need evidence. And this method gave me that. Small wins. Clear improvements. A growing sense of control. And control is powerful. Because when you feel in control, fear becomes smaller. Mistakes become manageable. And learning becomes something you choose, not something you avoid. Looking back, the biggest change was not my English level. It was my mindset. I stopped trying to impress and started trying to express. I stopped chasing speed and started building clarity. I stopped fearing mistakes and started using them. And through that process, I didn't just learn English differently. I became someone different. Someone more patient, more aware, more willing to grow slowly. Because the truth is, fast progress is exciting, But slow progress is sustainable. And sustainable progress? That's what changes your life. So if you're feeling stuck right now, if English feels too hard, too fast, too overwhelming, maybe you don't need more effort. Maybe you need a different way.
Slow down.
Tell your story. Listen to yourself. Repeat what matters. And trust that even if it feels small, it's working. Because sometimes the quietest methods create the strongest results. And sometimes the best way forward is to stop rushing. Building a new life together. What if love is not about finding someone who makes life easy, but someone who stays when life becomes difficult? That question didn't come to me in a romantic moment. It came during a quiet, slightly uncomfortable evening, when two people who care about each other realize they don't fully understand each other yet. Because building a life together in a new country is not just about love. It's about translation, not just of language, but of habits, expectations, and invisible rules you didn't even know existed. In the beginning, everything felt simple. We were excited, curious, open. Small conversations felt meaningful. Even basic sentences carried emotion. How was your day? I'm tired, but okay. I missed you.
Short. Clear.
Enough. But as time passed, life became more real. Bills, responsibilities, decisions. And suddenly, simple English was not always enough. I remember one moment clearly. We were trying to plan something important, something that required more than just basic conversation. I had thoughts, opinions, feelings I wanted to express. But when I tried to speak, my sentences felt incomplete. I think maybe we should not now. It didn't sound like what I meant. And that's the frustrating part. When your language level doesn't match your emotional depth, you feel misunderstood, even when the other person is trying to understand you. That's when tension appears. Not because of lack of love, but because of lack of clarity. And clarity takes language. There's a concept in communication called signal versus noise. Your message is the signal, but everything that interferes with it, unclear words, hesitation, confusion, that's noise. In a native language, the signal is strong. In a second language, especially in the beginning, the noise can be louder than the message. So what do? You don't stop communicating. You simplify the signal. That's what we learned to do. Instead of trying to say everything perfectly, I started focusing on saying the most important part clearly. I feel worried. I don't understand. I need more time. Not long explanations, but honest signals. And something surprising happened. The more honest I was, the less perfect I needed to be. Because clarity doesn't come from complexity. It comes from intention. At the same time, we had to learn each other's cultures. And that is a silent challenge. Because culture is not something people explain. It's something they expect you to understand. For example, the way people communicate in the United States can feel very direct. They say what they think. They express opinions clearly. They ask questions openly. At first, that felt intense. I was used to being more indirect, more careful, more subtle. So sometimes I would misunderstand tone. Was that serious? Was that a joke? Was that criticism? And when you're already unsure about the language, interpreting emotion becomes even harder. But slowly, I started noticing patterns. The way people use phrases like, I see your point. That makes sense. I'm not sure about that. These are not just sentences. They are tools. Tools for expressing agreement, disagreement, uncertainty. And once you recognize these tools, communication becomes easier. So I started collecting them, using them, practicing them in real conversations. And little by little, the noise started to reduce. Meanwhile, life continued to move forward. We created routines. Simple ones. Cooking together. Watching shows.
Going outside.
And these routines became our shared language. Because not everything needs words. Some understanding grows through experience. Through repetition.
Through time.
But let's be honest. It wasn't always smooth. There were moments of frustration. Moments when I felt like I was not enough. Not fluent enough. Not fast enough. Not clear enough. And in those moments, your mind can play tricks on you. It starts comparing. Because you only see the result, not the process. What you don't see is how long it took them. How many mistakes they made. How many moments they wanted to quit. So instead of comparing, I shifted my focus. I asked a different question. Am I better than yesterday? Not perfect. Not fluent. Just better. And most days the answer was yes. Even if it was small. Even if it was just one sentence spoken more clearly. That's progress. And progress, when repeated, becomes transformation. There's a psychological idea called compound growth. Small improvements, repeated consistently, create big results over time. Just like saving money. Just like building strength. Just like learning a language. And just like building a relationship. Because relationships are not built in big moments. They are built in small, repeated actions. Listening.
Trying.
Adjusting. Showing up again, even after a misunderstanding. And that's exactly what we did. We showed up. Not perfectly, but consistently. And through that, something deeper formed.
Trust.
Not the kind of trust that comes from easy times, but the kind that grows when two people stay even when things are not easy. And English? English became part of that journey. Not a barrier anymore, but a bridge. A bridge that was still under construction but strong enough to carry us forward. Looking back, building a new life together was not about becoming perfect partners. It was about becoming better communicators, better listeners, better learners. Because when you're willing to learn, not just the language but the person, you create something stronger than comfort. You create connection. And connection doesn't require perfection. It requires effort, patience, and the courage to keep trying even when your words are not perfect yet. So, if you ever feel like your English is holding you back in relationships, remember this. You don't need perfect English to build a meaningful connection. You just need honest effort. Because people don't fall in love with perfect sentences. They connect with real ones. And sometimes the most powerful sentence you can say is still very simple. I'm trying. And if you keep saying that, through words, through actions, through presence, you're not just learning a language. You're building a life. Together. The day I spoke without fear. What if the moment you've been waiting for doesn't arrive with a big announcement, but quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day? No warning. No dramatic music. Just a simple situation. And suddenly, you realize something has changed. That's exactly how it happened to me. It wasn't a special event. Not a test. Not a planned conversation. Just a normal afternoon. The kind you wouldn't remember unless something inside you shifts. I walked into a small local store. Nothing fancy. Soft music in the background. A few people moving around, focused on their own lives. I picked up what I needed, went to the counter, and waited. And then it happened. Hi, how's your day going? A simple question. I had heard it many times before, practiced it, repeated it. But usually my answer was short. Good.
Fine.
Okay. Safe answers. Quick exits. But that day, something felt different. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I didn't search for the fastest way out of the conversation. Instead, I answered, Hi, it's going well. I feel a little tired today, but it's a good day.
How about you?
And as the words came out, something inside me went quiet. Not empty.
Calm.
The kind of calm you feel when your brain and your voice finally agree with each other. The cashier smiled and responded naturally. We had a short conversation. Nothing complicated. Just a few sentences. But here's what made it different. I wasn't thinking about grammar. I wasn't translating in my head. I wasn't afraid of making mistakes. I was just speaking. And that moment, small as it looked from the outside, felt like a breakthrough. Because for the first time, English didn't feel like a task. It felt like a tool. A natural one. Now, let me tell you something important. That moment didn't come from nowhere. It was built. Slowly. Quietly. Through all the small things I had been doing. The simple stories. The repeated phrases. The uncomfortable practice. The days I didn't feel like improving but still tried anyway. There's a concept in psychology called automaticity. It means when a skill becomes so familiar that you can do it without conscious effort. Like driving, or typing, or speaking your native language. That's what was starting to happen. Not perfect fluency, but natural flow. And the key to reaching that state is not intensity. It's repetition. Consistent, meaningful repetition. The kind that your brain can absorb without resistance. Looking back, I realized something surprising. I didn't suddenly become confident. I slowly became less afraid. And there's a difference. Confidence sounds strong. Fearlessness sounds quiet. It's not about feeling powerful. It's about not feeling blocked. And once that block disappears, even simple language feels enough. After that day, I started noticing more moments like this. Small conversations that used to feel stressful now felt manageable. Ordering food. Asking for directions. Making small talk. Not perfect. Not long. But real. And each time I spoke, my brain reinforced a new belief. I can do this. This is important. Because your brain doesn't just learn language. It learns beliefs. If you repeatedly experience failure, your brain starts believing you're not good at it. If you repeatedly experience small success, your brain starts trusting you. And trust is powerful. It changes how you approach situations. You become more willing to try. More open to speak. More relaxed when you make mistakes. And here's something I didn't expect. Once I stopped fearing mistakes, I actually made fewer of them. Because fear creates tension. And tension affects your thinking. When you're tense, your brain is focused on avoiding failure, not on communicating clearly. But when you're relaxed, your brain can access what you already know. So ironically, the less I tried to be perfect, the better I became. That's a strange truth about learning. Perfection slows you down. Acceptance moves you forward. I also noticed something else. People were more patient than I expected. More understanding. More supportive. Not always, but often. And I realized something important. Most people are not judging your English as much as you think. They're focused on their own lives, their own thoughts, their own problems. So the fear of being judged, it's often bigger in your head than in reality. That realization alone can free you. Because once you stop imagining negative reactions, you become more present, more focused on the conversation, more connected to the moment. And that's where real communication happens. Not in perfect sentences, but in real interaction. There was one more moment that confirmed this shift for me. A slightly longer conversation. Unexpected. Someone asked me about my experience. Why I came here. What my life was like. And this time, I didn't avoid it. I told my story. Not perfectly. Not fluently. But honestly. I moved here for love. It was hard at first. My English was not good. I felt confused many times. But I kept trying. Slowly, I feel better now. Simple words. Real meaning. And when I finished, there was a pause.
Not awkward.
Just present. And then they said something I didn't expect. That's really inspiring. Inspiring? I almost laughed. Because in my mind, I was still learning. Still improving. Still far from perfect. But from the outside, it looked like progress. And that's when I understood something clearly. You don't need to reach a high level to make an impact. You just need to be real. Because real effort connects with people. Real stories stay with people. And real progress, even small, can inspire someone who feels stuck. So if you're waiting for the day when your English is good enough to speak without fear, you might be waiting too long. Because that day doesn't come when you're perfect. It comes when you stop expecting perfection. It comes when you accept where you are and speak anyway. Because fear doesn't disappear before action. It disappears during action. One sentence at a time. One conversation at a time. One moment at a time. And one day, without planning it, you'll speak. And it will feel natural. And you'll realize something quietly powerful. You didn't just learn English. You learned how to trust yourself. And that kind of learning, it doesn't just change your language. It changes your life. Family, children, and growth. What if the moment you truly understand a language is not when you speak perfectly, but when someone you love understands you completely? Not because your grammar is correct, but because your meaning is clear. That realization didn't come in a classroom. It came in a quiet moment at home, surrounded by family. Because somewhere along the journey, life changed again. It wasn't just about me anymore. It became about us. About building something bigger than language. About family. And when children enter your life, everything becomes more real. More responsibility. More emotion. More need to communicate clearly. I remember the first time I had to explain something important to a child in English. Not a simple instruction like, come here, or sit down. But something emotional. Something that required understanding. And suddenly, all the simple phrases I had practiced had to carry deeper meaning. I'm here. You're safe. It's okay. Short sentences, but powerful ones. That's when I realized something unexpected. You don't need complex English to express deep emotions. You need clear intention. Children don't care about perfect grammar. They care about tone, presence, honesty. And in that environment, my English started to change again. Not faster, but deeper. I began to focus more on clarity than correctness. Because when you're speaking to someone who depends on you, someone who learns from you, you stop worrying about sounding impressive. You start focusing on being understood. That shift is powerful because it removes pressure. And pressure is often the biggest barrier to learning. There's a concept in psychology called meaningful context. It means your brain learns faster when information is connected to something important in your life. And nothing is more meaningful than family. So naturally, my English improved, not because I studied harder, but because I used it in moments that mattered. Everyday life became my classroom. Simple routines became lessons. Time to eat. Let's go outside. Be careful. Good job. Repeated daily. Used with emotion. Connected to real situations. And over time, these phrases became automatic. Not memorized, but lived. At the same time, I noticed something interesting. Children learn language differently. They don't wait until they're ready.
They try.
They repeat. They make mistakes without fear. And then they try again. Watching that process made me question my own approach. Why was I so afraid of making mistakes when mistakes are part of learning? Why did I wait to feel ready when readiness comes from practice? So I started copying that mindset. Less thinking, more doing, less worrying, more speaking. And slowly my confidence grew again. Not from perfection, but from participation. Meanwhile, family life brought new challenges too. Different parenting styles, different cultural expectations, different ways of expressing care. And once again, language played a key role, because when cultures mix, communication becomes even more important. You're not just translating words, you're translating values, beliefs, habits, and sometimes misunderstandings happen, not because someone is wrong, but because perspectives are different. In those moments, English became more than a tool. It became a bridge for understanding, a way to explain, to listen, to adjust. And that takes patience, because deep communication is not fast. It requires time, attention, and willingness to learn not just language but each other. There were times I had to pause and think carefully about how to say something. Not because I didn't know the words, but because I wanted to say it the right way, with the right tone, with the right meaning. And that's a different level of language learning. It's not about vocabulary anymore. It's about connection. At the same time, something beautiful started to happen. English stopped feeling like a foreign language. It became part of daily life, part of family life, part of who I was becoming. And that's a big shift. Because when a language becomes part of your identity, learning becomes natural. You're not forcing it. You're living it. I also noticed how much I had changed. The person who once felt lost in a grocery store was now helping others. The person who once struggled to answer simple questions was now having real conversations. Not perfect ones, but meaningful ones. And that's what matters. Because life is not about perfect communication. It's about effective communication, being understood, understanding others, sharing experiences, building connections. And family is where all of that comes together. There was one moment that stayed with me. Simple, quiet, but powerful. A child said something to me in English. And without thinking, I responded naturally.
No translation. No hesitation.
Just response. And after that, I paused for a second, not because I was confused, but because I realized something. This is it. This is what I was working toward. Not perfection, not fluency, but connection. Real, natural, human connection. And it was happening. Slowly, quietly, but clearly. Looking back, I didn't just learn English. I grew into it. Through life. Through love. Through family. And that kind of learning doesn't disappear. It stays with you. Because it's built on real experiences. Not just lessons. So, if you're learning English right now, and you feel like progress is slow, remember this. Growth doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes, it looks like small conversations, simple routines, quiet understanding. But those small moments, they add up. They shape you. They build something stronger than skill. They build connection. And connection is the true purpose of language. Because at the end of the day, English is not just about speaking correctly. It's about being present in someone else's world and inviting them into yours. And when you can do that, even with simple words, you're not just learning a language. You're building a life. A real one. A meaningful one. One conversation at a time. Lessons from starting over. What if starting over isn't a failure, but a skill most people never learn? It sounds uncomfortable, maybe even a little threatening. Because starting over means letting go of what you know, what you're good at, what makes you feel safe. And most of us spend our lives trying to build stability, not restart it. But here's the twist I didn't expect. Starting over didn't break me.
It rebuilt me.
Not in a dramatic, movie-like way.
No instant transformation.
No sudden success. Just slow, quiet changes, layer by layer, moment by moment. And the lessons I learned along the way? They didn't come from textbooks. They came from real life. From confusion, mistakes, small wins, and days I didn't feel ready, but moved forward anyway. The first lesson was simple, but not easy to accept. You don't need to feel ready to begin. I waited for readiness at the beginning. I thought one day I would wake up and feel confident enough, prepared enough, fluent enough to handle everything. That day never came. Instead, what happened was this. I acted first and readiness slowly followed. This is something backed by psychology. Action creates clarity. When you take a step, even a small one, your brain gathers feedback. It adjusts. It learns. But when you wait, your brain stays in uncertainty, and uncertainty feeds fear. So, the idea that you need to feel ready before starting? It's a myth. You become ready by starting. The second lesson was something I had to learn the hard way. Progress is not linear. I used to think improvement would look like a straight line, getting better every day, understanding more, speaking more clearly. But real progress doesn't work like that. Some days you feel confident.
Some days you feel lost again.
Some days, a simple conversation feels easy. Other days, the same conversation feels difficult. At first, this confused me. Why am I going backward? But I wasn't. I was cycling through layers of understanding. There's a concept called the learning curve. At the beginning, progress is fast because everything is new. Then it slows down, even feels like it stops. But during that phase, your brain is actually reorganizing what you've learned, making it deeper, more stable. So what feels like stagnation is often consolidation. And that's necessary for real growth. The third lesson changed how I saw mistakes. Mistakes are not problems.
Avoiding them is.
I used to fear mistakes. I thought they showed weakness, lack of ability, lack of intelligence. But the more I tried to avoid them, the less I improved. Because learning requires feedback. And mistakes are feedback. They tell you what needs adjustment. They show you where the gap is. And more importantly, they give your brain a reason to remember the correct version. There's something called the error correction effect. When you make a mistake and then correct it, your brain strengthens the correct information more than if you had never made the mistake at all. So mistakes don't slow you down. They speed up learning if you use them. The fourth lesson was about something many people underestimate. Environment shapes behavior. When I changed countries, I didn't just change location. I changed context, different language, different culture, different expectations. And that forced my brain to adapt. At first, it felt uncomfortable. But over time, I realized something powerful. When your environment requires growth, you grow. Even if you don't feel like it. That's why learning English in real-life situations felt different from studying it in isolation. Because in real life, you have a reason, a need, a purpose. And purpose drives action. Action drives improvement. The fifth lesson was more personal. You don't lose yourself when you start over. You discover new parts of yourself. I was afraid of losing who I was. My identity, my confidence, my sense of control. And in some ways, I did lose those things temporarily. But what replaced them was something stronger. Adaptability, patience, resilience. These are not qualities you learn in comfort. You develop them in uncertainty. In moments where you don't know what you're doing, but you keep going anyway. And those qualities stay with you long after the situation changes. The sixth lesson was about time. Real change takes longer than you expect, but happens faster than you realize. That might sound confusing, but think about it. When you're in the process, everything feels slow. You don't see big results every day. You don't feel dramatically different. But then one day you look back and everything has changed. Your thinking, your confidence, your ability, and you realize it was happening all along. The seventh lesson was the most important. You don't need to become someone else to succeed. You need to become more of yourself. At the beginning, I thought learning English meant changing who I was, becoming more like others, speaking like them, acting like them. But over time, I understood something deeper. Language is a tool, not an identity. You don't lose your personality when you learn a new language. You expand it. You gain another way to express yourself, another way to connect, another way to live. And that's powerful, because it means you're not starting from zero. You're building on who you already are. Looking back, starting over was not just about moving to a new country. It was about changing how I see challenges, how I approach learning, how I respond to fear. And none of those lessons came quickly. They came through experience, through repetition, through moments that didn't feel important at the time but shaped everything later. So if you're standing at a point in your life where you feel stuck, or unsure, or afraid to begin again, let me tell you this honestly. Starting over is not easy, but it's not impossible either. It doesn't require perfection. It requires willingness. Willingness to try,
to fail,
to learn, to continue, even when progress feels slow. Because in the end, starting over is not about losing your past. It's about creating a future that your past couldn't give you. And that future? It starts with one simple decision: to begin again. Would you start over? What if the life you're dreaming about is waiting on the other side of a decision you're too afraid to make? Not because you don't want it, but because you already know how uncomfortable it will be. That's the real question, isn't it? Not can you do it, but are you willing to go through what it takes? Because starting over sounds inspiring until it becomes real. It means uncertainty. It means losing control. It means stepping into a version of life where you don't feel confident, where you don't understand everything, where you're not the best anymore. And let's be honest, that's not a comfortable place to be. So now, I want to ask you something directly. If you had the chance to restart your life for something meaningful, love, growth, a better future, would you actually do it? Or would you stay where you are because it feels safer? There's no right or wrong answer, but there is an honest one. Because deep down, you already know what you want. The real struggle is not desire. It's fear. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of losing what you already have. And the most powerful one, fear of discovering that you're capable of more and then having to live up to it. That last one is rarely talked about, but it's real. Because once you realize you can change your life, you can't go back to pretending you can't. And that responsibility feels heavy. I remember standing in that exact space, between staying and leaving, between comfort and possibility. And the hardest part wasn't the decision itself. It was accepting the consequences of both choices. If I stayed, I would feel safe, but always wonder, what if? If I left, I would feel uncertain, but have a chance to grow. So the question became simple. Which discomfort am I willing to live with? Because either way, there is discomfort. Staying has its own kind of pain. A quiet, slow dissatisfaction. A feeling that something is missing. A life that works but doesn't fully excite you. Starting over has a different pain. Immediate. Intense. Unpredictable, but temporary. And that's the key difference. One pain stays with you. The other changes you. There's a concept in psychology called future regret. Studies show that people regret the chances they didn't take more than the ones they did, even if those chances didn't work out perfectly.
Why?
Because action gives you closure. You learn.
You grow.
You move forward. But inaction leaves questions, unfinished stories, endless what-ifs. And those can stay with you for years. So when I ask myself, would I start over? I wasn't just thinking about the present. I was thinking about the future version of me, the one who would look back and ask, "Did you try?" That question became more important than fear. Because fear is temporary, but regret can last much longer. Now, let's bring this back to something closer. Your English. Because in many ways, learning a language is also a form of starting over. You step into a space where you're not confident, where you don't have full control, where you might feel like a beginner again, and that can be uncomfortable.
So, what do many people do?
They avoid it. They wait. They tell themselves, "I'll start when I feel ready." But as we've already seen, readiness doesn't come first. Action does. So let me ask you again, but in a different way. Would you start over in your English journey? Would you allow yourself to be a beginner again? To speak imperfectly? To make mistakes? To feel uncomfortable just for a while? Because that while is where everything changes. That's where your brain adapts, where your confidence grows, where your identity shifts from "I can't" to "I'm learning." And once that shift happens, everything else becomes possible. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not. There will be days when you doubt yourself, days when you feel stuck, days when progress feels invisible. But those days are part of the process, not signs to quit. Signs that you're in the middle of growth. And growth always feels uncomfortable at first. Think about it this way. If you go to the gym and your muscles feel sore, does that mean you're failing?
No.
It means you're using them. You're building something. Learning English works the same way. That discomfort? It's your brain stretching,
Adapting.
becoming stronger. So instead of asking, "Why is this so hard?" try asking, "What is this helping me become?" Because every challenge is shaping you, not just your skills, but your mindset, your resilience, your ability to keep going even when things are not perfect. And those qualities go far beyond language. They affect your life, your relationships, your confidence in other areas. That's the hidden benefit of starting over. You don't just improve one thing. You transform many. Looking back, if I had chosen to stay in my comfort zone, my life would be easier.
But smaller.
More predictable. Less meaningful. And through that, I discovered something important. You don't need to be fearless to start over. You just need to be honest. Honest about what you want. Honest about what you're avoiding. And honest about the fact that staying the same is also a choice. So now, the question comes back to you. Not as pressure, but as possibility. Would you start over? Not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly. Because sometimes the most powerful decision you can make is not the one that feels safe. It's the one that feels real. And if you're still here listening, thinking, questioning, maybe a part of you already knows the answer. You don't need to rush it. You don't need to prove anything. Just don't ignore it. Because that quiet voice inside you, it's not trying to scare you. It's trying to guide you. And maybe, just maybe, it's pointing you toward a life you haven't fully experienced yet. A happy ending, a new beginning. What if the ending you're waiting for is actually the beginning you've been avoiding? That sounds like a twist, right? Because we're taught to look for happy endings like their final destinations, clean, perfect, complete. But real life doesn't work that way. Real life gives you moments that feel like endings and then quietly turns them into something new. That's where I am now. Not at the end of my story, but at a place that finally feels peaceful. And if you had seen me at the beginning, confused, quiet, afraid to speak, you probably wouldn't recognize this version of me. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is different. In a good way. My English is not flawless. I still make mistakes. Sometimes I pause. Sometimes I search for words. But the difference is I don't stop anymore. I don't feel that fear in my chest when someone speaks to me. I don't panic when I need to respond. I don't avoid conversations. Instead, I show up.
Fully.
Honestly. And that changes everything. Because confidence is not about knowing everything. It's about trusting yourself, even when you don't. Life here in the United States is no longer something I'm trying to survive. It's something I'm living. We built routines. Real ones. Morning coffee. Simple conversations. Laughter that doesn't need translation. Family moments that feel natural, not forced. And somewhere along the way, English stopped being a challenge. It became part of the background. Like music you don't always notice, but it's always there, supporting the moment. That's when you know something has truly changed. When what once felt difficult becomes normal. But let me tell you something honestly. This happy ending didn't arrive suddenly. It was built. Through all the small moments you've heard in this story. The confusion. The mistakes. The days I wanted to quit. The slow practice. The simple sentences. The uncomfortable growth. All of it mattered. All of it led here. There's a concept called nonlinear transformation. It means change doesn't happen in a straight line. It happens gradually, then suddenly you notice a big difference, like water heating. At first, nothing seems to happen. Then slowly it reaches a point where everything changes. That's what this journey felt like. And if you're still in the early stages, if you're still struggling, still doubting, still feeling like progress is slow, you might be closer than you think. Because change is often invisible until it isn't. Now, when I look at my life, I don't just see improvement in English. I see growth in everything. In how I think, in how I respond to challenges, in how I handle discomfort, in how I connect with people. And that's the real reward. Because learning a language is never just about language. It's about who you become in the process. More patient. More adaptable, more open, more willing to try. And those qualities don't disappear. They stay with you. They shape your future. There's one moment I want to share with you. A simple one, but meaningful. I was sitting with my family, having a normal conversation. Nothing special.
Just talking about the day.
And suddenly I realized something. I wasn't translating. I wasn't thinking about grammar. I wasn't planning my sentences. I was just present, listening, speaking, responding, naturally. And for a second I paused, not because I was confused, but because I was aware. Aware that this was the moment I had been working toward. Not perfection, not fluency, but freedom. The freedom to express, to connect, to live without hesitation. That's the real happy ending. And here's the beautiful part. It's not the end. It's the beginning of a new chapter. Because now, new opportunities appear. New conversations. New goals. New versions of yourself waiting to be explored. That's the thing about growth. Once you experience it, you don't go back. You move forward. Even if the path is uncertain. Even if the next step is unclear. Because now you trust the process. You've seen what consistency can do. You felt what progress feels like. And you know deep down that you can handle more than you thought. So, if you're watching this, if you followed this story from the beginning, if a part of it feels familiar, let me tell you something important. You don't need to change your life overnight. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to start.
Small. Simple. Honest.
Speak one sentence. Listen to one story. Try one conversation. And then repeat. Because that's how everything in this story began. Not with confidence. Not with certainty. But with one small decision.
To try.
And that decision? It can change everything. So maybe the real question is not, can you do it? But will you begin? Because your story doesn't need to look like mine. Your journey will be different. Your challenges will be unique. But the principle stays the same. Growth happens when you move, not when you wait. And if you take that first step, no matter how small, you're already doing something powerful. You're choosing possibility over comfort, over fear, over doubt. And that choice, that's where every meaningful story begins. So this is not goodbye. This is your beginning. If you've made it this far, let me ask you one last question. What if your life doesn't change because of something big, but because of one small decision you make today? Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready.
Today.
Because the truth is, I didn't change my life in one moment. I changed it in many small, quiet moments, when I chose to try instead of quit, to speak instead of stay silent, to continue even when I felt lost. And maybe you're standing in that same place right now, feeling stuck, feeling tired, wondering if it's worth it. But what if this feeling is not the end? What if it's the beginning of your transformation? Because every fluent speaker you admire was once confused. Every confident voice you hear was once afraid. Every new life started with uncertainty. So here's your invitation. Start small. Speak one sentence today. Listen to one story. Try even if it's not perfect. And then come back tomorrow. Because this channel is not just about learning English. It's about building a new version of yourself, step by step, story by story, day by day. If this story connected with you, don't just watch and forget. Be part of it. Subscribe to the channel for more slow, easy English stories that help you improve listening, speaking, and real-life communication. Like this video if you believe it's time to restart your journey. Comment below. Would you start over? I read every comment. And remember, you don't need perfect English to change your life. You just need the courage to begin. See you in the next story.